Hello, everyone. My name is Dana Karcher, and I'm with the Davie Resource Group, and we're really glad to have you here for our webinar, Achieving Urban Forest Ambitions, How Useful is Itree as a Tool for Urban Forest Planning? So we're going to go through a couple of really quick things that we need to take care of. I wanted to let you know that there is a question and answer box on your panel on the side. Please put your questions in there. We're excited to have some opportunities to answer those with our panelists today. We're going to put some links in the chat, so make sure you check that as well as we move through this. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're going to introduce our speakers. And our first speaker today will be Sue James. She's a chartered architect and worked in private practice in West Wales, focusing on sustainable buildings in context. In parallel, she was also a consultant for the Derek Lovejoy Partnership, which is a landscape architect firm. She's a founding member and convener of the Trees and Design Action Group, which started as an association in 2007 before gaining charitable status in 2013. She's also advised Future Build, formerly EcoBuild, for many years on content for the Knowledge program. The focus of her present work is on the collation and dissemination of research and information. Apart from her role in TDAG, she is a member of The Edge, a built and natural environment campaigning think tank, and a member of the Adult Advisory Board for Teach for the Future, the student-led campaign for climate education. And then we're going to have Kieran Doig, and he is the head of Urban Forest Research Group at Forest Research. Forest Research delivers scientific knowledge on UK urban forests, all the trees in and around the urban realm. I love that definition. I thank you for putting that in there, Kieran. Kieran's research interests include urban forest resilience, urban tree valuation, and quantifying the role of urban forests in delivering ecosystem service benefits to society and valuing these services. And our last speaker, but certainly not least, is Keith Saker. He is the outgoing chairman of the UK Arboricultural Association, a trustees of the Trees and Design Action Group, arboricultural and urban forestry director at Bartram Trees, and director of Treeconomics. He has an MS in urban forestry and a BS in arboriculture and a BS in social science. And prior to joining Bartram Trees, Keith gained valuable experience working with other major tree nurseries in the UK, as well as managing trees and other green spaces in the public sector. He was the chairman of the drafting panel preparing British Standard BS 8545 Trees from Nursery to Independence in the Landscape, which was published in February of 2014. He has spoken at conferences in the UK, the USA, Australia, Russia, and other parts of mainland Europe. As a director of Treeconomics, he has been working with Itree in the UK for the past 18 years, which is about as long as I've been working with Itree. So I am really excited to have you join us. So we're going to get started right here. Real quick, I'm going to turn off my camera and just kind of go through some presentation questions so that we can practice a little bit with questions. Sue will get started, but we're going to answer a poll. Who's here today? So to answer the poll, I'm going to launch it here. Maybe I'm going to launch it. There we go. So who's here today? Oh, this is interesting. We've got a number of academic researchers, number of tree officers, arboricultural consultants, and 36% others. So I'm going to close this poll. You've had your practice. We'll share that on the screen. So interesting. And then I'm going to launch another poll because we're interested to find out if you've used Itree in your own work. And I'm trying to get to that poll. There we go. So that's a simple yes or no. I'm going to close that now. So Itree's been around for a while, and 40% of you say yes, you've used it, and 60% say no. So I hope you're going to get a lot out of this. So I'm going to turn this over to Sue, and we're going to go ahead and get started. I think I'm turning, okay, here we go. There we go.
There we are. So can everybody hear me?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to take part. I suppose in some ways I'm here as the client, kind of asking the question, how useful is Itree for the kind of work I might be doing? But I thought we might just start with a few facts and figures and face up to a bit of reality. You know, we are in the UK one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. We're one of the less densely forested countries in Europe. Our average tree canopy cover is not just over half what it might be in, say, Lyon in France. And there seems to be a rather sad and dispiriting correlation between lack of canopy cover and social and economic deprivation. And I think that was even more expressed and understood with lack of green space and trees during this pandemic when we were all locked down. Next. So for me, a big question is what, trees, the role of trees with the climate and ecological breakdown that we're facing. I mean, that is actually our biggest challenge. So I won't discuss the benefits of trees. I'm sure there's chapter and verse on that. But there are some things that trees really can help us with, reducing the urban heat island effect, because overheating urban areas are going to be an increasing risk to health and well-being. They do capture carbon, however, they may not be hugely significant in their carbon capture. Probably Kieran can help with that a bit more, but they do capture carbon, and actually with our challenge for carbon, not only have we got to reduce emissions, but we have to capture any carbon we can, so they're important there. We know they're beneficial to health and well-being, and health and well-being is now enormously high up the agenda, physical health, mental health. And so that's also another reason why we want to make sure we get kind of a quality of tree canopy cover. And of course, they support wildlife and biodiversity. Next. And there is some research that shows that tree-lined streets can actually help the migration of certainly of birds and perhaps other insects and other forms of wildlife, particularly if you can actually then provide green spaces, so like Barcelona is doing. So there's actually a sort of recognition that they do actually help biodiversity. So my forecast asks for the urban forest. I think they're pretty fundamental if we're going to protect it. We must have more ambitious urban tree canopy cover targets and deliver these. You'll note through everything I say, there's an emphasis on deliver, do, achieve. You know, we've done a lot of talking over the years and time is running out. We really do need to deliver. We need to distribute tree canopy cover more equitably across towns and cities. How do we decide what this means and how to do it and how much? Wickham Council, for example, requires 25% for new developments. What should we be determining for commercial districts, industrial districts, and so on? I think perhaps more work is needed here. And also the understanding that we don't all have to say, hey, I'm going to get 40% tree canopy cover. It's more, how much tree canopy cover does your area need, depending on its geographic location and what it's already got, what it could increase by, what's relevant to it. And we must have a robust species composition. We must have future resilience. Climate change is going to do all sorts of things. We have no idea what the increase in pests and diseases might be, which is where biosecurity comes in. And goodness me, why are we still talking about biosecurity? That's another thing that we've had on our agenda for many years. So that's another do. And we need to deliver tree benefits at all scales, at a national scale, at a local scale. and on individual sites. Next. So what do we need to do? Okay, at a national scale, let's celebrate the progress that has actually been made. I mean, currently the policy environment, certainly in England, and actually because Scotland and Wales are ahead of us in the UK, has never been more favourable to trees, especially to urban trees. We have the England Trees Action Plan. We have the revised NPPF with the famous clause 131. We have the Environment Act. At a local authority scale, not so clear. In the Trees and Design Action Group's view, all local authorities must have adopted tree and woodland strategies, because this sets out what must be delivered. And please note the word adopted. That is the only way tree and woodland strategies will have real teeth when it comes to planning decisions. And again, this isn't a new proposal. Trees and Towns 2 called for comprehensive local tree strategies in 2004. So another shock that we're still talking about this 18 years later. Next. And to make us even more ashamed of ourselves, in 1908, Nettleford, who was a social reformer ultimately, wrote, and I'm going to read this because I think it's really important. Under present conditions, when a new estate is developed for building, the first thing done is to cut down trees that have taken 50 or 100 years to grow, and which, if left standing, would be of great value to the health of the district, as well as greatly adding to the cheerfulness of the neighbourhood. Well, this isn't what happened then, and we know better now, and we wouldn't do it like this now. It is actually happening now, and because we do not properly factor into decision making tree value and the ecosystem services they provide. So we really do need those adopted tree and woodland strategies to reinforce that. Next. So the Trees and Design Action Group is trying to help to fill this space. So we've been developing a document called Trees, Planning and Development, a Guide for Delivery. It was much bigger than we ever anticipated when we set out on it. It is now 4 sections. Section 1 is on our website. Sections 2 and 3 are in development, and section 4 is a sort of enlargement of what was going to be a simple briefing note on how to develop a tree and woodland strategy that delivers. This is because the England Trees Action Plan also required that DEFRA produced a toolkit for tree strategies for local authorities. And that's being undertaken currently by the DEFRA Plant Health team with the Tree Council and FERA, with Trees and Design Action Group as a very small, minor junior partner in this process. But it made us realise that we had to get on with our own document, and the idea is that we try and make sure that the 2 guidance documents are basically saying the same thing, with the exception that the DEFRA document will be more extensive because it has to take into account rural trees as well as urban trees, whereas of course TDAG focuses mostly on the urban. Next. So just to clarify, what is a tree and woodland strategy? So our view is that it is probably the most influential step a local authority can take to ensure the local area and the communities it supports will get the best from trees both now and in the future. It provides a route map for this iterative process, examining the key questions and proposing ways to deliver solutions. Next. So what are these key questions? So these key questions have been around for a long time. I was reviewing, I mean, we've been talking about these 4 questions. What do we want? What do we have? How do we get what we want? How will we know we're getting what we want? Was it Miller in '87? I mean, certainly it carries on through a process until with Michael Leff and Davey and US Forest Services in 2016. So the questions that we need to ask are well rehearsed. So what I want to look at here is the question, what do we have? Now, what do we have? We'll have several things that emerge from it. And as I say, the process is iterative, so we don't expect you to start with what do you want and end up with how we know what we're getting. You will go back and forth between those as you learn more. But on the what do we have question, there's one really important thing we need to know, and that is what do we have in terms of species composition, numbers of trees, tree density, tree health, because I never understand how people can say will increase canopy cover by X% if they don't actually know what they've got to start with. Next. And at an individual or site scale, this is important because this is actually where we can specifically influence the benefits that trees deliver. This is where we can make sure that we don't have Nettleford's complaint, we retain existing trees, where we can provide the right places to plant the right trees. And if I extend that, according to Ian McDermott, of course, in the right way and for the right reason. So getting to it, how do I hope that Itree can help? So immediately, I'm hoping that it can provide that essential evidence about what we have at both the local authority and individual site scales. I'm also hoping that it can already help us to design in the benefits that we'd like to achieve at these scales, so that, you know, if you're designing an individual site, you decide what you want to achieve and why you're planting the trees, what the reasons are, and so you design in the benefits that you hope to achieve. And if I look ahead, can it help to quantify or value health and well-being, which is, as I said, so high on the agenda that it's a serious consideration, and actually one of the reasons that actually support the case for trees? And can it help to quantify building energy effects? As an architect, I'm always saying how you design the external areas influences the environmental performance of buildings. And given that we've got issues like overheating, which we still haven't resolved in building terms, you know, what is the role of things like trees for shading, particularly in the increased areas of climate change and increased hot summers and higher levels of sunshine? So that's what I'm hoping Itree can help with. I'm hoping that Kieran and Keith will now show us how that can be done. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Sue. Interesting. I'm going to change the presenter now, and Kieran's going to get us started.
Thanks so much, Dana. Thanks, Sue, for really setting out your desires, your wishes from Itree. And as control comes over to myself, I'm looking to my screen to see that you can now see my slides, and I believe you can see slide 1. So my role, thank you, Dana, is to share with you some evidence of what we found in Great Britain, evidence for the changes that Itree seems to be having on the ground. Research that was conducted a few years ago, so I'd like to share my thanks to Kate, Liz, Claire and Suzanne for their help in this, and take you through some of the findings, and we can then move on to discuss with Keith and Sue just how this relates to Sue's asks and what else we might do to actually get more bang for our buck, to get more out of Itree. Now, as you would expect from somebody who works for a research organisation, Forest Research, there was a research strategy behind this. I only have sort of about 10-12 minutes to talk to you today, so I'm not going to go into the detailed methodology in detail, but you'll be pleased to know, I'm sure, that there was an extensive literature review involved here. We conducted interviews with stakeholders who worked both at the local and at the national scale. We had an online survey so we could capture a broader pool of respondents, those people who worked within 6 case studies and beyond those 6 case studies. And all of this helped inform our evaluation and our understanding of what Itree has been doing for us. The 6 case studies are listed there on your bottom right-hand side of the screen. And we have shared one handout with you in the handout section of the webinar for you to download to see some of the more in detailed information that came out. But all of the information is available via our web pages, and we can get that linked to you if you can't find it. There were 2-page summaries for each of the case studies. It was a very extensive review, and there's even a 6-page executive summary. So lots of information out there. So let's move on to find out the information I have to share with you today. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware of key change theory or logic chains, a simple way of breaking down the step-by-step links between, it could be an action on the ground, it could be a management plan, it could be a wider thinking or a change of behavior. But logic chains allow us to break it down into these discrete steps so we can think about what is driving what and how change happens. Typically, in a logic chain, you have the very basic steps of input, process, and output. But then once you've got an output, once something comes out of a process, it actually starts to trigger changes, outcomes in other words. And these outcomes in turn trigger more change, such as impact. How do we understand this within the context, the language of Itree? Well, an Itree project, you've got to have inputs, you've got to have pounds, you've got to have time spent, you've got to think about the planning, and then you have to implement the project. So the process, there's field work that's done, there's analyses that's done, there's reporting, and hopefully there's communication around the reports that come out. Yes, the reports, the graphics, the information are the outputs, they're the knowledge, but they in themselves don't deliver change. A report on the shelf is not much good. They then hopefully will lead to new policies, perhaps even new funding, new enterprise. These again aren't necessarily change on the ground. A new policy is not a tree in the ground. So the outcomes here are your change catalyst, if you like. And moving on beyond that, you then get the impacts. Well, if we do get trees in the ground, oh, there we go. We've got the wrong slide jump up. That's interesting. Bear with me, technical issue. And we should be coming back to the right slide now. There we go. Your outcomes then lead to your impacts, and your impacts are like so trees in the ground and ultimately an increase in biodiversity, the difference that we're after ultimately. So within our research, we use an impact framework, and the impact framework is a published one, and the types of impact that we're particularly looking for break down into 4 categories: conceptual, connectivity, capacity, and instrumental. You can read them on screen, but what I want to drive home for you at this stage is that the conceptual impacts basically are looking at the changes in how and why decisions are made. The connectivity impacts are around the broadness and awareness of understanding of urban trees and their collaboration in their management. Capacity changes are capacity impacts are more to do with the ability to argue for the case for urban forests. They might be increasing skills, they might be bringing in more funding. And finally, the instrumental impacts are those where we see a change in the way decisions are made, or even the way of behaviours or practices on the ground. So probably the sort of things that most people associate actually with the impact side of a logic chain or of an Itree project is changes on the ground that people are expecting. So what did we find? Looking across all of our case study locations and our national review, as I said, what evidence of conceptual impact did we find? Well, you would expect conceptual impact simply because the definition of the conceptual impact is improved understanding. And one thing ECO does really, really well is describe your urban forest. What is the composition, the structure, the health, the distribution of those trees across your town or city? And what sort of benefits are they delivering to people? So you're going to get an awful lot of this if you deliver the project well. And in the light blue font here with the inverted commas are quotes from our respondents, and I'll let you read those for yourself or catch up with them afterwards. And I'm going to stick really to focusing on the black text. So why does ECO do this well? Well, it's evidence-based and it's scientifically credible. In summary, Itree ECO is help improving our understanding of urban trees. Moving on to our next impact type, connectivity. We saw regularly, in fact, in about half of all of these situations, an increase in engagement between council departments, not just greater conversation between employees within a department, but more interaction and outreach between departments and even beyond the council as well. So connectivity impacts here related to improved relationships. How? Because an Itree ECO project delivered well pulls in stakeholders from lots of different sectors, meetings before, during and after the project to get people talking. And actually, interestingly as well, once you get your results and you put them out there and you start, hopefully you start and you keep on having more and more conversations, and the benefits that are illustrated and quantified and valued within an Itree project get people talking. Our third category is capacity, and the key impacts we found here were evidence for increased funding, not only for spending on the trees, for more planting, for more maintenance, but also for retaining staff or securing new staff. Not a great deal of evidence for this, actually. Lost my number. About a fifth of our case study examples demonstrated evidence for that, but still, it comes with time as well. How does it do this? Well, it provides improved expertise and it provided information. If you can get across to the chief accounting officers, to the decision makers, the importance of the trees and the importance of them as a resource, then of course there's a likelihood or a greater likelihood that they'll invest in protecting that asset. So in summary, eco helps justify investment in our urban forest. Our final category is instrumental. Obviously, you've got the reports, that's your output. Your outcomes are your new strategies, your new policies, hopefully. In many cases, just over half of the cases, we found there were new policies or in fact even tree and woodland strategies that developed. The other impacts were new practices and new changes in the way decision making occurred. Because the departments were aware of this information, one department might say to the other department, actually, before we change this road or before we implement the design of this new development, what can we learn about the trees in the neighbourhood? What do we need to do differently here? So there was good evidence here that eco is driving and informing new policies simply because it's providing the evidence for better decision making. Let's capture all of those down into one summary slide. The darker green here, the conceptual impacts, are just to drive home to you that actually we found more evidence of conceptual impact. This is where the most examples sat. So you would expect this, as I said, really because you've got that much more understanding. And I flag this in this way really because I think it's around the design and the thinking and the delivery and the aftermath of a project that actually is the other categories that then can come through and deliver more change, more impact, and therefore we could see more connectivity, more capacity and more instrumental changes in future. And that's really, I think, where our discussions might go in a minute, hey Keith, because we want to see more tree strategies, and only 2 of our 6 case studies actually had that. But at the same time, we were able to identify, as you might expect, some barriers. What were the barriers, the challenges to actually driving home the changes? First of all, and a big one actually, dissemination of reports was not the focus of the project from up front. Strange as that might seem, but some projects actually spent more time thinking about getting the report and utilising it within the department who commissioned the project than thinking about who else might benefit. And I think it's fair to say that projects subsequent to these 6 case studies have really been able to benefit from that knowledge and have thought much more heavily from up front about who could benefit from this knowledge and how it can have change on the ground. Other barriers, Itree projects probably take a minimum of 9 months, maybe a year, maybe 18 months or longer to deliver in their entirety. And if you're not wary of this up front, changes in staffing and even budgets can lose connectivity in the delivery of project. So really good project and program management is instrumental here. I said only a couple of case studies had new policies come forward. We found from conversations with our participants that actually getting your timing right was pivotal. If a local authority or partner was thinking about having a change in their strategizing or their policy creation, then, and they knew that was coming up in 1 or 2 years' time, then now is the time to get on and do eco and find out the evidence, the information to inform that new writing. Lack of high-level support came across time and time again. Somebody senior to drive, somebody senior to have oversight and recognise the importance of spreading the information across different stakeholders inside and outside the council. And of course, I refer to the council most often or regularly in my speech because it does tend to be local authorities, local planning authorities who lead in the commissioning and the delivery of these projects. Because they're typically guardians of something like 50, 60, 70% of the urban forest in most towns or cities. So it's going to fall to them, I think, but hopefully we'll see more and more projects as we step forward, bringing out more collaborators. I haven't touched my computer, so why is the screen changing? That's not helpful. You're back on slide 1, aren't you, Dana? I've got network problems. I want to go to my last slide.
There you go.
There it comes. Must be activity. So this is my last slide. I'm roughly on time, so this is good. So what are my recommendations to get the most impact out of your Itree project? Plan early. Your project planning is instrumental. Look at those opportunities that are coming up. Look at the policy windows. Look at the local context. Get together a project team and some wider stakeholders and set out your objectives, your desired outcomes. What are the impacts you want to achieve? Use our logic chain, if you like, or create your own logic chain to see if we want to get as far as an increased canopy caliber, as Sue was sharing, what do we need to do? We need to understand what to plant. We need to understand where to plant it. We need to understand what trees are going to do best in those locations. We need to understand if those trees are suited to our changing climate. And we need to understand if we've already got a lot of that tree, that species, and therefore we can think about, are they doing well in our locality? During project delivery, let's think about who we want to read the report. Let's tailor our reports so that we can deliver the messages nicely across the audiences that we want to focus on. And that probably means a mix of technical reports, summaries, infographics, meetings, presentations, and so on. A big one, I couldn't really find much bigger text to write in, get the project champion. I said there before about senior staff. Project champions do tend to work very well if they're senior or well-placed or elected members, because they have that clout to reach across. And involve people from the local area, your public, get people involved in volunteering or even just organising events for you to come along and disseminate the information. That should be it from me. Thank you very much. And Dana, I think you're going to take control away from me now and pass it to Keith, aren't you?
I am. It's the time I have the most control in my life is when I'm running a webinar. So we're going to go ahead and pass it over to Keith and let him get started.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. I think you should have the correct image rather than my image with the notes. So if that's the case, then I will begin. So one of the problems with going last in a panel of 3, when the 2 speakers before you are both illustrious and very good presenters, is there's nothing left to say. So I shall try and develop some of the things that both Sue and Kieran have said in a way that's more in terms of questions and hopefully to stimulate the debate as we move forward for the period of this webinar. There's an old adage that one picture tells 1,000 stories. So the picture you're faced with is a small park in London. I started working in that park as a gardener in 1971, which gives you an idea of my age. This picture of this row of lime trees was taken 2 years ago. Those lime trees are exactly the same size as when I started work in that park. So the question of ecosystem services, the question of poor growth, the question of impact of that long stretch of tarmac, the prioritisation of the development of those trees, the impact of management and maintenance. There's many, many questions just within that one photograph that are actually really quite relevant to the use of Itree and how Itree can actually stimulate those developments within the urban forest that we're all looking for. So I'm going to be focusing on data, but data and imagination. How creative is the use of Itree? our targets and objectives met. Now, there are many things we're very familiar with. Now, I don't appear to be moving my screen forward, Dana.
Did you just try and move it and it didn't go?
Yep, I just tried to move it forward and it didn't go. So
Okay.
again.
I'll do it for you.
Okay, thank you.
Just give me a sec here to get reorganized and I will take care of that for you. So I'm going to go back to me. And we are here.
Okay, great. Okay, so I shall use the next method then, Dana, from here on in, if that's okay.
It's good.
So when we're talking about the benefits of trees, they're well known and well documented. They're not every benefit's included, and we know that Itree only measures a limited number of those benefits. So the diagrams are common now, but what purpose do they serve? And I said it's going to be questions. So strategy documents that spend the first 20 pages outlining the benefits, which were already in the public domain, they seem to be at least worrying and a barrier to further reading. So it's the same knowledge being regurgitated in different forms. And what outcomes are achieved by having that knowledge? Next slide, please, Dana. Great. So again, we've got a familiarity with data collection and the data that's actually resulted. And this is from the London Borough of Ealing. It was a report that Kieran was actually involved in. And it's probably the most comprehensive Itree study that's actually been carried out at one authority, in that we did Itree eco plot sampling. We did an Itree study of the inventory of the London Borough of Ealing's publicly owned trees. And we did a canopy study. And we produced all this data. So you can see the data. I say I'm not going to read through it. And that data is important. As Kieran has said, it provides the groundwork. And as Sue intimated, Itree does give you a really good picture of what we have. But it's the question then arises, how are we using that data? And probably, and I've done this several times now, going out to talk to clients who actually are interested in using Itree. And the first question I always ask is, what do you want Itree to do for you? What do you want an Itree report for? Because there's a great danger that this data is collected, amassed, everybody claps their hands and says how wonderful it is, then puts it on the shelf and nothing happens. And as Sue has intimated, the critical element of all of this is that there is an outcome. Something happens on the ground. Next slide, please, Dana. So, what's the point of collecting all the data if the outcome is what we see on the screen now? That's a picture from Sweden. Those trees, you won't be surprised, are now dead and have been removed. Next slide, please, Dana. So here's an alternative. This is from Stockholm. And you can see the trees there are vibrant. And it's probably the best urban growth I've seen for tree planting on all my travels. So I think you have to ask the question. It's not the fault of the data, but the way it's being used, perhaps the way it's being used. How imaginative are we being when considering the data, and what's it telling us? What changes in policy and working practices, and focus on working practices? What are the outcomes? What's delivered on the ground? Next slide, please, Dana. And now I'm going to have just a quick look at one particular case where imagination has been used. It's not complete. There's more work to do. There's talk of a comprehensive urban master plan for this particular London borough. London borough, which will remain unnamed, even though it's plastered over every document in front of you. But you can see they've actually looked at Itree and the analysis of the urban forest to carry out a policy review. How do their policies reflect what they're trying to achieve? They've produced a tree planting strategy. They've produced an Orville report to see what the land use is like in Islington. How is their land, how is public land being used? Who are the users? They've done a canopy cover assessment, and they've carried out an inventory report of their public trees. All of these are standalone reports, but all of them are interlinked with the information that's being gathered from the Itree studies. Next slide, please, Dana. So, using the data, tree planting strategy, to strategize tree planting, to plan for species diversity, to target planting on those areas with the greatest needs, to prioritize ecosystem service needs, to plan procurement strategies, to monitor and inform progress, to revise planting methods based on evidence. What works? What doesn't work? What species are right? What species are not right? How do we need to buy our trees? Do we need to plan in advance to get the tree mix that we actually want? Next slide, please, Dana. So, a policy review. How do our policies relate to international policies, to national policies, to local policies? How do it engage with other disciplines and other policy documents within the particular local authority? To inform a long-term strategic approach to tree management, and to, more importantly, to engage with other stakeholders affected by the policy. Next slide, please, Dana. The Orville report, as I said, land use. How's the land used? What are the demands of the communities that use that land? How do they use it? To understand macro and micro needs of different communities, stakeholders, which includes things like cultural difference, ethnicity differences and demands. All of these are the areas that underpin or are behind the data. The data will inform decisions about all these different elements. So the question remains, how imaginatively are we using the data? Next slide, please, Dana. So here's an example. Here's canopy cover. So we could produce Islington an average of 25%. Fine, but look at the variations within Islington. The difference between Hill Rise and Bun Hill. Are we identifying and looking at sort of environmental inequities there? Are we looking at the means of prioritising where we want to plant? Next slide, please. So, and Islington has used the data to produce a web map. So the web map is available on their website, and it gives information to the community. It explains to the community what's happening in their area. And it outlines the data. It puts the data to a practical use. So next slide, please, Dana. So it's been used to communicate with the public and others about the urban forest, informs people of local planting and other initiatives, provides comparisons between different areas within the same community, details of management plans, basis for local community group action, and make them feel part of a bigger picture. Provide an informed reference point for all those interested, and I can't spell interested, in the urban forest. And provide an access point where relevant further information can be found. It has a harmonising effect. People are involved. Next slide, please. And that's me, really. I mean, all I've tried to do is to suggest to you and to perhaps open your minds to the thought that data collection is great. Data collection is useful. Understanding what you have is obviously useful. But then it's imagination and communication as to how you move forward. And as Sue quite correctly says, all of this is pointless unless it makes change on the ground, unless we see differences. And this picture is a perfect example of a town within trees as opposed to trees in the town. And I think that perceptual change is the one that is critical. We have to look at beyond just considering trees in towns. We have to look at towns in trees. So thank you very much, Dana. You can take me down now and we can begin the discussion.
Great, let me get us adjusted here. Everybody needs to turn their cameras on and we will get into the question and answer. Let's see, I'm just gonna kind of scroll through here. I flagged some of them. One of my favorites. How can we monitor tree canopy cover increases over time? Let's see, there's more to it here in each local authority. Who wants to take that?
I'm struggling. Go for it, Keith. I'm struggling with the software.
Oh, okay, no, I mean, the monitoring over time, in fact, doing it in a simplistic way is an Itree canopy study. An Itree canopy is a very simple tool to use. In the Itree canopy, purely you mark out a geographical area and you are faced with a series of points over a Google map, and you actually assess tree or no tree. That gives you the information. It takes probably 4 hours to do 1,000 indicators, Kieran, would you say? Something like that. So it's a very simple, straightforward. There will be aerial photography is a more complex and more detailed approach, but very in its simplest form, Itree gives you the tools to monitor canopy development.
And Keith, in my experience, I believe that it's a great, Itree canopy is a great starting place to begin to tell that story. So that's one of the things that I have used it for with clients, is that if you're just starting out and people want to know, you know, your government wants to know where you are, this is a great starting point. So
can I just ask you?
Sue, go ahead.
So I was going to say, just to sort of clarify, so how often to monitor how you're going should you be looking at Itree canopy? Because you could have a big development. Unfortunately, it could be nettle forded and you could have, the trees could have gone. So your canopy cover could change quite dramatically, couldn't it, quite quickly? Is that a fair assessment? Is it something you have to sort of keep an eye on, do every year, every...
How often do you check your bank balance?
I hope I do it every month.
Then you've, I think, answered the question in that the frequency will depend on the change. The more change, the more development, the more increased frequency. But again, I think, you know, canopy is a great starting point, as Dana says. It's also a blunt instrument in that it just does exactly what it says on the tin. It gives you canopy. It really doesn't tell you about your species composition. It doesn't tell you about the age class of your trees. It doesn't tell you about the health of your trees, the vulnerability of trees. It's a great starting point, and it's a wonderful engagement tool. I used it here in Lewis when I live, and it took me, I think, 4 hours or so to maneuver my way around and produce a respectable plot number. I think I did about 1,000 dots, but I was able then to go to community groups and say, Lewis has got a canopy cover of 22%. What does that mean? And you're right, it's a wonderful starting point. It's the first key bit of information. I would add that I do feel, again, with imagination, the use of canopy cover targets, again, is a blunt instrument. Because one of the things that's missed out, it's a very easy jump to go from, oh, we want to increase canopy cover, then we need to plant more trees. When the reality is you need to have an understanding of the trees you've got and carry out investment in those trees so they're actually growing to an optimum level. Hence my picture of the London Park, where there's a group of trees whose ecosystem service delivery has remained constant for the best part of 40 years because the maintenance of those trees has been limited.
I was going to add, and I think perhaps you're pausing there for thought, aren't you, Keith? That actually one of the things I like about Itree Canopy is that you get the option to decide what spatial area you investigate. So you can do your whole city in one go, you can do a park in one go. As an organisation, we run a project for volunteers, citizen scientists, to go on to a web map to access shaped files, which basically give you an area that we recommend you survey, which is electoral ward area. You then use the Itree Canopy tool to find the tree canopy cover within each electoral ward. And we're doing this for the whole of the UK. We're about 80% complete, and with the Woodland Trust, we're having a big push in the next couple of months to get that complete. So that'll be the first time that canopy cover has been mapped at electoral ward level for the whole of the UK. I mean, Keith very nicely showed the work done for Islington, but what about others? They need it too. And not everybody can do it. So we've been doing this as a citizen science project. I think I'd also add, though, for Sue's benefit and those less familiar with canopy perhaps, is that be wary, users, of what base image is underneath when you're doing your Itree Canopy, because if the image hasn't changed, you're only going to measure the same canopy cover. So, you know, the image that's within Itree Canopy, clock that as you do your study.
Thanks so much, Karen. That's really good. And the follow-up question on this one is, what are the key differences between Ariel Canopy Survey and, in parentheses, the asker put Clyde Climate Forest and Itree Canopy Cover? So really, what are the key differences between Ariel Canopy and Itree?
Well, maybe I should take that because I helped to do some of the stats for the Clyde Climate Forest. We have seen consistently through most Itree Eco projects a slight underestimation of the percentage canopy cover reported through an eco project than what you would get through the likes of using the Itree Canopy tool, which is what was used for doing the assessments for Clyde Climate Forest and many other similar sort of projects. And there are subtle reasons for that. One is around how you draw your definitions. So within an Itree Canopy project, you're perhaps more likely to mark a shrub as a tree, and therefore you get a higher value. Whereas when you're on site in the plot of an Itree Eco plot, you can see that a shrub is a shrub, or you can measure it, even better still. So statistically speaking, there doesn't tend to be any difference, but within the scale of data that you get out of it, you'll find that Itree Eco will be sat slightly lower. There's also the simple reality that with an Itree Eco plot, you go to your 200, your 250 plots, you knock on the door and say, please, can I have access to come in? And if you don't get in, you have to go to a different plot, which may or may not have the same canopy cover. And what we're running at 33, 34 eco projects across the UK now, Keith, between us, I think is about the right number. And we do tend to see this trend is consistently there. It's not something to worry about, because I think with any trend analysis, whether it's Itree Canopy or Itree Eco, compare your apples with your apples, not with your apples in your pears. So if you want to look at change over time, make sure your baseline information is comparable. It's as simple as that, really. And there are other techniques. You know, you've got the national tree map, you've got satellite imagery, polygons drawn around tree canopies. All of this can be thrown into the mix, and they're all useful depending on needs and objectives.
Thanks. That's a great answer. The next question is, does Itree Eco work in woodlands?
In short, yes.
And I would say no.
Oh, that's interesting. I would love to hear why you say no, Keith or Kieran.
I'd love to see you why. No, so for me, it's really quite interesting. Okay, Itree Eco says on the webpage an urban forest tool. So you are talking about trees in the urban realm. Now, okay, you get woodlands in urban realms, so you have to factor that in. But actually, let's look at the base models and let's think about what you are measuring those woodlands in relation to. If you're just doing a woodland, I'd be more skeptical. But if you're doing woodland as a component of whole urban forest, then it's part of a broader population, and therefore it's part of the the bell-shaped distribution of tree sizes of relationships across the whole urban forest. And if you look at the basic models about how you calculate carbon in a single tree versus a woodland tree, for example, then you see there is a 0.8 multiplier that's applied. So let's always use a tool for how it's described to you. So it's not really a yes or a no, and I was a bit, toying with Keith there, but I think it's about, let's be mindful that we're using it within the right context.
And there's probably the difference between us, Kieran, in that you're the scientist, I'm not. I'm the broad brush, you're the detail. The one thing I would say about using the methodology within Itree to use woodlands, and we found it in the very first study in this country, which was in Tor Bay, that the diameter of the starting point of the trees that were part of the survey was set incredibly low. That meant that included in the study was every leyland hedge in Tor Bay. So leyland hedges in terms of tree numbers actually distorted the numbers in terms of relevance to the population. So it does have there are limitations to it, I agree, but again, for the broad brush, for the understanding of the urban forest, I think Itree Eco is perfectly valid.
I love both those perspectives. And thinking about some of the projects that I've done, woodlands have always been included, because if they're in the urban forest, they're in the urban forest. But when you think about a woodland where we're working and a woodland where you're working, so, I envision something completely different almost. So geography and plays a big part of this too. So
Sue's got a hand up, Dana.
What was that?
I've got my hand up. I was going to say, can I ask a question? All that's way outside my pay scale, but can I ask a question? One of the things that really concerns me is we have political ambition to plant lots of trees, and we've all heard, we'll plant 20,000, we'll plant 100,000, we're going to have 200,000 more trees in our little town. You think, why? Can we have guidance on what kind of, it's a discussion, you and Kieran, that you and I have had about geographical differences, all sorts of differences. So how do you actually get guidance as to the level of canopy cover would be relevant for your particular area and circumstance? Because I think that would be extremely useful and might be a way of counteracting this kind of competitive tree planting, which usually doesn't actually end up in succeeding in what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a little snippet. We got an article coming out actually in our magazine quite in the next iteration, so catch it if you can and read it. But some work we did with Southampton was looking at a variety of tree canopy cover within different electoral wards that were of different primary land uses. And we found that even if you said an electoral ward was primarily residential, you still had a broad range of tree canopy covers within those type of electoral wards. So just because a ward is, say, residential or industrial doesn't actually predefine the canopy cover that you can achieve in there. So I think a better way to think about this is actually, what do you want to achieve? And is it because you want to achieve, so there's a great example, isn't there, from the States. They used to have this blanket 40% target. And then they said, actually, we need to be more intelligent about this. If we want to achieve cooling in our hotter cities, we want to be near the top end. Actually, but if we want to achieve more aesthetics, or there's a different sort of ecosystem service benefit we want to achieve, then we might go for increasing diversity or spatial alignment rather than a blanket canopy cover target for itself. So it really is difficult to answer the question, because you probably will have a different canopy cover target for each benefit you might want to prioritize. The maps that Keith was showing around the differences in spatial distribution, I think, are really important, actually, because you can then start to look at distributions and inequity and lack of delivery of any benefit to people. And even by increasing canopy cover by a small percentage there, you can increase the overall amount. But I think what we need to be spending more time thinking about is doing some opportunity mapping. Where are your flood risk areas? Where are your hot areas? Where are your low biodiversity areas? Where is canopy cover low? Get all this information in a GIS type system, layer it up, and actually reflect on the opportunities. You know, a couple of sessions back in this webinar series, we had Birmingham representatives talking about their master map, and they did some of this. So there are some really good examples out there, but we need most towns, if not all towns and cities, to start reflecting on that. I hope that captures it. It's so difficult at the moment to answer in any blanket way. We've done some research that says the average in UK towns and cities is what, just below 16%. Plenty are above 20, 25, some are even nearly 40%. So with that, we said, actually, why don't we have a target of 20? Because it's attainable for most. But even that, I think, should be pushed to be intelligence formed, not just because it's attainable. Okay.
And this is, I think this is what I mean by imagination. It's rather than say, okay, here's a global target, here's a universal target. It has to be related to the local community. You're quite right when you say related to local problems. So there may be areas where the tree canopy, the priority will be to mitigate high levels of atmospheric pollution. Now, the solutions to that is not going to be met purely by canopy cover targets. It's judicious use of species. And I think this local, and this is why I'm so I think local engagement is critical to all of this. Community involvement is critical to this whole analysis. And I think we've just got to move it. If there's a next step, it's to move government, both central and local, away from using blunt targets like numbers and percentages and moving them towards an educated view. And part of that is this idea of a vision. What do you want? Now, what's the purpose of all this? Why are we doing it? Why are we increasing canopy? Why are we looking for species diversity? And it seems to me that so many government, central and local government policies are driven purely by numbers because it's fashionable to do so, rather than actually analysing with any clarity what they want to achieve by taking these initiatives and carrying out these investment levels.
That's great. We are past 9 o'clock, my time. I don't know what time it is your time, but we're after the top of the hour. But if you can stay on for a little bit, we've got still quite a few questions that I'd like to run through. I'm happy to stay on. Just know that I haven't had coffee yet this morning, so at some point I may just drop on my computer screen. But are you guys good? Staying on a little bit?
Yeah, I'm okay for a while, yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm going to kind of run through these. You know, it's interesting when you were talking about, Sue, that was such a great question. You know, in the States, we had an organization years ago say, this type of town should have 25% and this type of town should have 40%. Okay, I think that that was well over 15 years ago that was, and it wasn't based in science. And I'm still fighting that battle with cities that say, well, we should be a 40% city. Well, you don't have room for 40% canopy. You don't have room. There's no place to put the trees. So, you know, that's also a key consideration too. Somebody wanted to play devil's advocate with you. I'm not going to do that right now, Kieran. That was for you. But I love this question. What's the best way to communicate uncertainty within the Itree model to policy? So what's the best way to communicate uncertainty within the Itree model to policy?
Shall I take that, Keith?
I'm struggling to understand the question.
Okay, well, so interesting. I emailed some colleagues, some contacts, some friends, more who done Itree projects more recently, and one person very kindly wrote back, and some of the questions I asked them, what would you have done differently? And their answer was, I would have had a bigger budget and I would have collected more data. Now, we've got ourselves in this bit of a pattern in the UK of 200 is enough. 200 plots, that's our town or city. Because there's this lovely little curve in the Itree manual that says for 200 plots, you get an average of 12.5% uncertainty or error, or however you like to understand it. But Not most people don't read the NOAC paper that sits behind it that says that's an average. And actually, across the different cities upon which that research was based, that could have been 40%, it could have been 10%, but when we averaged them all down, this is your average error. And we don't tend to deal with the uncertainty in an Itree Eco project simply because it is of very little relevance to most of the readers. Itree Eco projects deliver change because they deliver understanding on composition, on species, on species and size and so on. And actually it's that understanding that allows you to inform your new policies and your new creation. And you don't really need an error bar around whether you got 50 plus or minus 5 species composition or 100 plus or minus 5. Actually, what you there's enough understanding there to think about. Actually, we're well below what we need to be, and we need to be changing it. Above that, you can actually take uncertainty to the level of how robust are the models, the science that undersits. All the different components. So is it around the scientific model that quantifies carbon in trees? And how well does that science apply to the UK? Is it around the air pollution removal? Okay, so you can unpick all of these at lots of different levels, and researchers have done this. There's several good papers came out last year that look at this, and some actually for previous years. What does the air pollution element of Itree Eco, does a dry deposition rate work in Italy or Portugal as well as it does in the UK? Because their climate's different, okay, a lot drier. And you can then perhaps start to think about, actually, is that just as relevant in southeast England as it is in the colder, wetter northwest of England? I do wonder, actually, to what extent all of these things matter when you're not using the pound sign as a driver change and you're not driving markets behind it. It's right to communicate uncertainty to the decision makers. And I think as long as they're aware that there is uncertainty and the context of that, then that will enable them to make a decision. I think to try and hide it completely, it would be our mistake.
I agree.
I know, but it's case specific.
I've now engaged my rather limited brain capacity, and I understand what's meant. I've got nothing much to add to what Kieran said, other than the fact that we have to realise that on the scale of things, this type of urban forest analysis is still relatively young. There are gaps in the range of Itree, as Sue quite correctly pointed out. We can safely say that the values we put on the urban forest and the services they provide are seriously undervalued because they don't take account of health and well-being, for instance, seems to be the global one. But what we have to say is, at this moment in time, Itree is the best we've got.
Yeah,
it's developing the whole time, and I think Kieran's point about it provides us with acceptable and, as far as it goes, scientifically verified baseline data that we can use. And the baseline data over time is going to improve. The range is going to improve. But to be looking at certainties now, I think, and use those uncertainties to avoid using Itree is a mistake, because it's the best tool we have at the moment. And once used, the management of the urban forest is improved in whichever way you want to look at it, purely because we understand what we've got better. Not perfectly, but we understand what we've got to a greater degree.
I think it's worth adding that, you know, the science that underpins eco is reviewed, peer reviewed, it's published, robust, it's from multiple countries. Even though it's predominated by the States, it tends to come from multiple countries. And there is an argument, and I think it's a strong one, that a tree species, say an Acer campestre, growing here in the UK, as well as growing in a, I don't know, suitable state within the US, where it's capable of growing there, would be of a similar size, stature, performance, etc., because it's that type of genus, that species, etc. So with that commonality, that read across, the geography shouldn't matter too much. for the biometric side of things. I think when it comes to the air pollution and side of things, it might be more challenging, as I said, but there is that commonality. So let's try not to read too much into it.
I like that answer. I like that answer a lot. I'm just going to grab a couple things real quick. Itree and in India and Itree in Germany. Are those both possible? Germany, I know, but India, I'm not sure. Yes? Okay, great.
Yeah, the limitation, as I understand it, would be actually the species and including the species within the list. But I also know that an awful lot of work has gone in, and the species list, which backs up Itree, is now extensive and is worldwide.
Okay, thank you. And then how can I use Itree for advancing the use of trees for rainwater management? I am working in a utility company.
Be interesting to know what country. I think your main point there actually is there's a few tools here within the Itree suite. So your country is important here. Itree Hydro, Itree Design, Itree Eco, all of these things can help you understand the role of trees and flood management or rainfall interception. The key thing to watch out for is with each tool is what is the land permeability under your canopy cover? Is it preset within that tool or is it not preset? Because between the different tools, it can vary. So I think I'm going to say, check out your manuals, do some reading, talk to Itree support.
That's what they're there for. Is Ariel more accurate? I'm assuming for canopy.
You're going to have to look at your definitions again, because even with Ariel, you've got a challenge of resolution. There's some really good high definition aerial imagery, satellite imagery coming through now if your budget's big enough. So I don't know, with standard definition, are you going to capture much below a 3 meter wide radius effectively? You've got seasonality involved. There's some really good work being done these days on recognizing subtle differences between species and maybe species identifications coming through. Let's be careful about trying to get a definitive answer just at the moment when there's so much cutting edge stuff coming through. It all comes down to your definitions and your needs.
You know, we do a lot of canopy work, a lot of aerial studies, more than we do, I think, Itree canopy at this point. And that it's always changing. The flyovers are amazing now, and you're right. So it just kind of depends. So there was a statement, and then it was followed up by a question. Kieran mentioned a key issue and challenge, tree equity. Our new trees and urban forestry strategy in Dublin has identified low or absent canopy cover to socioeconomic disadvantage, result zero, I think, ecosystem services. We prioritize this but need political support. And then he mentions the U.S. Forest Service webpage on equity. So really he says, sorry, the question is how to use Itree to capture and connect through GIS with social data such as health status, social class, poverty, employment, so we can do ecosystems needs assessment. And I said all that to say this. I think we just set up a really good opportunity for another webinar. That's a huge topic. But anyway, if anybody wants to grab that and run with it a little bit, I think that's be a great topic. Sorry, Nadine, if I just threw that out there for you.
I think we need to go to Dublin and check it out on the ground. Sorry, I can't answer that site visit.
I'm happy to do that. I'll come with you guys, okay?
Yeah. Oh, you know that pub as well then, Kieran.
No, I think that's an answer for you, Keith. That's pretty straightforward, that one.
Oh, repeat the essence of the question again.
Really, how do we use Itree to capture or connect through GIS the social data such as health status, social class, poverty, employment, et cetera, so we can do ecosystem needs assessments?
What we've done, we've just gone to public service and taken off the map overlays from those different public service and then made the assessments. I think Kieran's point is providing you're using some definitive boundary that's accepted by all. In the case of a London Borough, the ward boundaries, then you can actually pull the data off that gives you the different socioeconomic characteristics anyway. But yeah, but it goes back to what I was saying about imagination. It is imagination, and it's identifying new ways in which Itree can service your needs, and then being imaginative about how you use it. And it's so easy in my experience for people to say, oh, doing Itree is a virtuous thing to do. Okay, we'll do Itree. Great. Without thinking through what they're doing Itree for, why, and what outcomes they're going to produce from it. So everybody claps their hands and says, well, this is wonderful, all this data and information we've got. Then the report gets put up and put on the top shelf and is never seen again. It's that imaginative use of it. Where do you want to go with it? Sue's got her hand up. Sue.
So just a little comment, because so the wildlife and countryside link, now we've got the levelling up white paper, and levelling up is the big, government ambition. Wildlife and countryside link are asking, campaigning to have access to nature included in the bill, the levelling up bill. And obviously we're talking about trees and social deprivation. So isn't it actually something that we should be taking directly to DLUC and saying there are ways in which we can demonstrate what this will do using Itree, showing the benefits, and then that can actually be part of the legislation that goes forward. It kind of seems to me like it's a golden opportunity to say, get that, we can show the evidence, get it into place, because that way you can actually sort of show what contribution these can make to your levelling up agenda. I think we have to grab all these phrases and ambitions the government's expressing and show them actually how to deliver it.
I think you're absolutely right, Sue. I think the environmental land management proposals to replace CAP offer a tremendous opportunity for the use of Itree and the values. I think there are all sorts of government policy documents now where Itree should be recognised as a key element in not only the delivery of those policies, but the monitoring the outcome of those policies. So, yeah, I can't do anything other than agree with you.
I'm going to take it slightly back to eco, if I may. There is this interesting point here that between the Itree canopy, which is easy to draw your geographic boundaries on and assess at different levels, and Itree eco, which tends to be done at town or city level. And my related point is around the number of plots that you use. So to do what I think Sue is suggesting may require you to have better thinking when you design your Itree eco plot project up front. Build in your strata, your layers of interest, so you can look at or question equity and inequity better, which probably means more strata, more plots, bigger budget. So the reason I say it here is just to take it back to that eco discussion and actually take it back to this real clear need to define your project up front and what you want to achieve from it.
Unless, in terms of Sue's context, there's work we're doing at the moment which actually says, okay, can we use it as a forecast tool? So we start with inventory. We create a new inventory with imagined planting, and then we do an assessment on that imagined planting. And then we can begin to forecast what those respective plantings by species can deliver in terms of ecosystem services. So we can begin to say, okay, a beech tree, 10 years will deliver this, at 30 years will deliver this, at 50 years will deliver this. And what you can then is do comparisons between tree species. So your species choice actually becomes related to the ecosystem service delivery you want from a particular time period. So if you're working on a short-term development where tree longevity is not a characteristic, you can begin to say, okay, I can choose the species which delivers, shall we say, carbon capture relatively early in its life cycle, and will deliver that carbon capture for the period of the development and the tree is likely to be in existence. So again, the imaginative use of the data to actually be a forecast tool. We've just done some work where one local authority is looking at hedge planting. So we've actually come up with some data for 10 meters of different sizes of hedges in terms of width and height. We're going to explore the ecosystem service delivery of those hedge types. Once you've got a 10-meter run of any particular hedge, you can extrapolate that out to a mile, 2 miles, so you begin to get an indication as to what your hedgerow planting is going to be delivering. So it's that imaginative use of the data. How can you actually use it to actually make comparisons and then go into new areas with it?
We've got a number of questions here. I've answered a few of them. Somebody wanted to know if you could do specific species work, and I've done that. So I wrote yes. Really, I think that at this point, it is 9:20 my time. Let's go ahead and wrap this up, guys. And Val, okay. I learned a lot from you, and I hope that everybody else did as well. One of you said it, and I don't remember which one. It is the most incredibly powerful tool we've ever had, and that I think that it is still growing. And you know, Keith, you were there and on the beginning of it. I've been in the beginning of it, and I think that what we've been able to do with Itree to really grow urban forestry as a part of our community and the solutions that trees provide for everyday living. So it is what we have, and you guys did a great job. I'm looking forward to hearing more, and I want to thank you all for your knowledge and your presentations. And I also want to thank people for hanging around for a little bit, trying to get some of these questions answered. And feel free to reach out if you have more. And we look forward to the next webinar. Thank you all.
And thank you, Dana, for managing the session so well. So I appreciate that.
Thanks. I'm going to take over this job. Just remember to tell my my friend Josh, okay?
Yeah, and
thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah, you wasn't rude to me today either.
Thanks, you guys.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, take care.
Really fun.
Bye-bye now. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.